All right, welcome to the brief. We'll start with the time hack. It'll be time 0830 in 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hack. 1, 2, 3. All right, welcome to the brief. First of all, we'll start off with I'm safe.
I'm safe.
All right, and my last event was my check ride sim, so I am ready to go. Today's event will be the FAM 4101. Big picture overview today is we'll be taking off out of NAS Pensacola, flying up to the MOA, executing some high work. We'll come back, execute a few laps in the pattern to knock out some maneuvers, and then we'll head over to Mobile Regional, where we will do an ILS to a full stop. We'll stop there, get out of the jet, and then get ready to brief our second flight, where we'll do an air nav back home. We'll talk more about the second flight when we're in Mobile. Today's mission objective is to plan and execute a basic FAM flight, and then the training objectives are on the board if you would like to go ahead and read those. For admin today, we'll start with a kneeboard card review. All right, so we're the FAM 4101. We have a Joker bingo of 1.7, 1.2 for our Joker, and a 1.5, 1.0 for our bingo. Our divert fuel is also going to be a 0.5 to get to Mobile downtown. Call sign today, Rocket 11. We'll have Lieutenant Williams in the front with Captain Martin in the back. We're briefing now. We'll walk at 0930. GTS is 0945. We'll take off at 1000, and we'll land no later than 1130. We have all of our expected comm there in comm 1 and 2 columns. Sequence 1, we will leave blank today. Sequence 2 will be the Whiskey 155 as well as the Hawk 4. And Sequence 3 will be the Shelby and DeSoto MOA. GeoRefs will use 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, and they are noted on the bottom of our card. And then we have our flight plan there as well. Our mission conduct is there in the middle portion of our card, and then the lat longs of the waypoints that we will need are also there at the bottom of our card. On the right side of the kneeboard card is the Pensacola MOA with the appropriate waypoints. Any questions to the kneeboard card?
Nope.
Okay. For weather, NOTAMs, and BASH, we'll start with weather. Weather here at Navy Pensacola. Right now we're showing winds are 190 at 11 knots, 10 miles of visibility, scattered at 1800, broken at 15,000, broken at 25,000. For our time of flight, we expect the winds to be variable at 4 knots, unlimited visibility, vicinity thunderstorms, scattered at 3,500 feet, broken at 8,000, broken at 25,000, with a tempo line that's showing 1 mile of visibility and rain. For the divert, which is Pensacola International, right now we're showing winds 170 at 12 knots, 10 miles of visibility, scattered at 2,100. During our time of flight, we're showing winds 180 at 8 knots, 6 miles of visibility, vicinity showers, broken at 2,200, broken at 5,000, broken at 15,000. For Mobile, which is our destination, winds are 210 at 11, 7 miles of viz, scattered at 2,100, broken at 5,000, broken at 15,000. And for the time of flight, we should see winds at 180 at 8 knots, 6 miles of visibility, vicinity showers, broken at 2,200, broken at 5,000, broken at 15,000. And finally, our divert, which is Mobile downtown, is right now 150 at 6, 10 miles of visibility, few at 2,700, scattered at 3,300, broken at 4,300. And for our time of flight, we're showing winds 150 at 9 knots, 6 miles of visibility, vicinity showers, broken at 2,200, broken at 5,000, broken at 15,000. For NOTAMs, here at Navy Home Field, we're showing that the glide slope is down on the ILS today, so we will not be able to use that, as well as runway 1 and 19 are closed for construction. There are also multiple taxiways that are closed for that construction, so we need to pay attention today when we're getting our taxi instructions and making sure that we get a good readback with ground and that we are following directions appropriately. Pensacola International, the ILS runway 17 is unusable, and then the Softly VOR is also unusable. There are also many obstructions out there. As long as we stay on an appropriate approach, we'll be fine with those. For Mobile Regional, there are multiple taxiways that are closed. So again, we'll pay attention to what they give us when we get there to make sure that we're not taxiing incorrectly. Same thing with Mobile Downtown. There are a couple of taxiways that are closed there, so again, we'll pay attention to that. The bash is moderate today at all airfields, and there are no TFRs in our immediate vicinity. Any questions on weather NOTAMs, bash, and TFRs?
Nope.
All right, for our fuel plan today, we have a Joker bingo of 1,700 and 1,200 for our Jokers, and bingos of 1,500 and 1,000, as well as a divert fuel of 500 pounds, and that is to get us again to Mobile Downtown. To explain those real quick, we want to land at Mobile Regional with 500 pounds of gas. It'll take us 500 pounds to get from here at Pensacola, shoot an approach, and then get over to Mobile Regional. So we want to leave here with no less than 1,000 pounds. So that will be our bingo getting out of here. We'll add 200 pounds to that for our Joker for a 1.2. And then to leave the MOA, it will also cost us about 500 pounds to leave from the MOA and get to the airfield, do our pattern work. So we would like to leave the MOA with no less than 1,500 pounds, and again, we'll add 200 pounds there for our Joker for a 1.7. Any questions on the Joker bingos or the fuel plan? All right, for pre-flight today, we'll start down in maintenance. We'll go ahead and read the book together. I'll answer any questions that you have with the book. Make sure you're good to go for that. We'll sign the jet, and then since it's today is the first flight, we'll do the walk around together. I will show you what to look for and how to properly pre-flight the aircraft. Once we are done with the pre-flight, I will watch you strap in to the aircraft to make sure that we have everything hooked up properly. All your connections are good to go, as well as all your harness and all that good stuff. So you'll jump in, get strapped in. We'll make sure that all the switches are set correctly. And then once that's good to go, I will jump into the front seat, flip on the batteries, and then get strapped in. Once I'm strapped in, we'll do an ICS check. What I expect to hear from you will be loud and clear, anti-skid switch on, engine switch on, FCS to norm, eject, select to both. Please don't just tell me that the switches are in those positions. Go ahead and check and make sure that those are actually in the correct positions. Once we are done with that, you'll hear me say we have a 3.0 GTS, and at that point we'll hit the GTS button, and we'll be off to the races for starting up the motor. All right, so some things that I need you to do as a student while we're starting the motor is to monitor the instruments, which I should be doing as well, but also get a good inside-outside scan, taking a glance down at the PC frequently to make sure that he's not trying to signal anything. If he's giving us some sort of engine fire type signal, you're going to see it before I do, as I will be focused purely on the EGT, especially once we go throttle idle, making sure that we don't have any sort of abnormal start. As soon as the motors come online, the generator light will go out, and then we should get a thumbs up from the PC. So come up over the ICS and say thumbs up from the PC, and I'll acknowledge that. And then start setting up your system. So what I need you to do is get all your systems turned on first, so they can start running through their checks and all that good stuff. And then you can start inputting information. So make sure you have your MFDs on, go ahead and turn on your navigation equipment, and then get your radios on ASAP. When you turn on your radios, just go ahead and immediately go to button 1 on your primary radio and go button 30 on your aux radio. That way we can listen to ATIS as well as listening up on base in case they need to pass anything to us. While we're listening to ATIS, make sure that it runs through at least one time, and make sure that you're noting all pertinent information to include the identifier, the weather, the duty runway, the altimeter, and then any other pertinent information like gear positions and things like that. Once we've both listened to the ATIS, we'll switch off and go button 2, where we will receive our clearance. For that call, it should be clearance delivery, rocket 11, single, DD-175, clearance on request, ready to copy. Go ahead and copy down the information and read it back just like you always have. And then when you're done with that, you can go ahead and switch the radio to button 3. Expect while you're doing all this, I'll be going through my NATOPS checks with the aircraft. And at that point, by the time you get done with the clearance, we'll be getting pretty close to seeing that COG light go out. Once the COG light goes out, just let me know that you're ready for PC checks. And then we'll confirm that over ICS, and I'll give the thumbs up to the PC. Expect we'll do a wipeout, we'll kick the rudders, and then he'll have me put the flaps down, the speed brakes out, the hook down, and if it's a Monday morning, we'll go ahead and put the launch bar down as well. Once we do that, he'll put his hands in the air. I need you to do the same thing, and from that point on, until we see a thumbs up from the PC, you must keep your hands and elbows above the rails. You can still put information into the DEP and the MFDs up there, but do not talk on the radio or put your hand down underneath the rails. If somebody tries to call us on the radio or you want to tell me something over ICS, don't respond. Just let it go until they give us the thumbs up. As soon as they give us the thumbs up, then if you need to tell me something, go ahead and go for it. Expect that right after that, they're going to pull the chocks. We're going to taxi forward. We'll stop for just a second. We'll taxi forward for a second again, and then we'll come back to a complete stop. When we come back to that second complete stop, they're going to go into final checks. So there's not much time in between PC checks and final checks. So don't try to start getting into some communication or something like that. Just know that we're going to go right back into final checks, where again, we have to keep our hands and our elbows above the rails there. At any point during the PC or final checks, go ahead and knock out the rad out bit. Make sure that we're done with that so we don't taxi out of the line having not completed our rad out bit. If once we're done with that, if we haven't completed all of our setup for our navigation systems, we'll go ahead and just head over to Marshall. No big deal, especially on a FAM1. Take your time to get your system set up. So we'll taxi to Marshall, and I'll just let you know to take your time, and then you let me know when you're done. For our nav setup, we want to do a standard TAC SOP setup. So big things there, have the course line for the appropriate runway running through our TACAN, and then the waypoint to our first nav point, which today should be TZ, set up in your system. Once you have all your waypoints and everything set up as it should, just let me know, and then we'll go ahead and taxi at that point. When we're pulling out of Marshall, we'll call base, so it should be Rocket Base, Rocket 11, side 01, outbound. And then we'll call on ground, we'll call Sherman ground, Rocket 11, single, taxi with Charlie. They'll give us the taxi information, and as I said today, the taxiways, a lot of them are closed, so we'll listen up to what they give us. But today, given the closures that we have, we could see some sort of back taxi on runway 7. If they give us that, we have to come to the hold, or we have to stop at the hold short there before we get onto runway 7. So again, just back me up there and make sure that we're getting the appropriate taxi instructions. We're not crossing anything that we shouldn't be. Once we're off and taxiing, instrument checks will be next on our checklist. Just make sure that you go through and do a full instrument checklist there. So we should make sure that the needle and the ball are both swinging opposite of each other, and make sure we get it for both the right and the left, as well as going and make sure we have a proper altimeter set in. We'll check our standby altimeter as well as the altimeter on the MFD to make sure that those sync up, and then we'll also check to make sure that we have the appropriate squawk set and ready to go. Once those are done, you can go ahead and call complete, and then we'll move on immediately to takeoff checks. Again, we'll go through methodically through the takeoff checklists, and once we're done with that, the last step will be to arm our seats, and then you'll arm your seat last, and then you'll call takeoff checks complete, and at that point we'll be ready to go flying. If at any point after that you need a minute, just let me know, and we can always pause before we call for takeoff or whatever we need to do if there's something else that you need to adjust before we go flying. Any questions up to this point?
No.
All right, for takeoff and departure, again, once we're ready to go and you have nothing else that you need to do, we'll go ahead and call for takeoff. So it'll be Sherman Tower, Rocket 11, single, takeoff. At that point, they'll give us our cleared for takeoff switch to button 6. So we'll go ahead and execute our hold short checks. Make sure that we complete all those prior to doing the run up. Let me know once you're done with those, and then just give me the ready for run up. At that point, we'll do our MRT checks. What I should hear from you once all the engine instruments steady out, we should hear no warnings, no cautions, good heights, good volts, good engine instruments. Time is 00, line speed is 91 knots at the gear. Once I hear that, I will release the brakes and we will be heading down the runway. Once we get to the gear, go ahead and call good gear, assuming that we do see 91 knots at the gear. If we're not actually at 91 knots, go ahead and call out what you actually do see, and we'll make the decision at that point as to whether or not to continue or to abort. Our departure procedure will be up to 3,000 feet, and then at 1 DME, we will turn right to 150, expecting that runway 7 takeoff. As we're accelerating there on takeoff, we'll make sure that we have the gear up and the flaps up and all the lights have gone out. Also checking just to make sure that we have the speed brakes in, and then there are no warning or caution lights. And at that point, we'll call aircraft clean at whatever our airspeed is. And then the IP should check the handle and make sure that we have a good handle. After that, we'll make our departure call, which would be Pensacola departure. Rocket 11 is passing 1,000 for 3,000. Any questions on the departure?
No.
All right, for toll data today, we have a temperature of 90 degrees. Idle should be 55%, plus or minus 2. Line speed is 91 knots at the gear. Takeoff distance will be 2,800 feet. Max abort is 140 knots dry, and if it happens to rain prior to that, it'll be 110 knots with a wet runway. Landing distance with full flaps will be about 4,000 feet, 4,000 feet, and our wet runway stopping distance will be about 5,500 feet. For our route of flight, the DD-175 flight plan will have us go into the Pensacola MOA via Teasy. Once we're done in the MOA, we'll get vectors back to NPA, back for course rules and then some pattern work. And then after we're done with the pattern work, it'll be TZ, Trader, and then Mobile Regional for the ILS and a full stop. For our op area, we will strive to get 2 adjacent blocks in the Pensacola South MOA. And then we'll be using 2 of these blocks in the area. Big thing to keep in mind is that we have a working area of 10,500 feet to 23,000 feet. However, if the altimeter is below 2992, then we only have up to 22,000 feet in the airspace. For our return to base out of the MOA, again, we'll come back for course rules to 7 left. We will request the carrier brake. And then once we get into the pattern, expect out of the brake, we'll do a single touch and go. And then we'll get into doing some other landings that we'll talk about in conduct. Once we're done with those, we'll request to pick our clearance back up to head out to Mobile, again via TZ Trader, and then direct to Mobile. All right, for the recovery, we're expecting to do an ILS in Mobile. So with the winds coming out of the south, we'll expect to do an ILS to runway 15 for that. We'll go ahead and knock out our approach brief before we get into the airplane so we don't have to do it out there. So expect that we'll be using the localizer frequency of 109.9. The final approach course will be 145. Runway landing zone is 8,502 feet, and then airport elevation is 219 feet. We have all of our frequencies here at the top, and then for the ILS itself, we will expect that we will remain above 2,000 feet until we're headed inbound, and then they'll drop us down to 1,800 feet. We'll remain at or above 1,800 feet until the final approach fix, which should be glide slope intercept. And at that point, we will come down to our decision altitude, which is 415 feet. Keep in mind, we can't see 415 feet in the jet, so the next highest altitude that we'll be able to see will be 420 feet. So at either 420 feet MSL or at 200 feet with the red out going off, we'll execute a climb out, a wave off and climb out if we do not have the runway in sight. We expect to break out today, but if for some reason that we didn't and we had to execute that missed approach, it'll be a climb up to 900 feet, and then we'll continue our right-hand climb to 2,000 feet to the SGI or the SIMS TACAN 140 radial at Saint, as depicted here on the approach plate. Any questions about the ILS? All right, and then once we execute that ILS, we'll bring in a full stop. Bring it into a full stop. Again, since we'll be landing to the south on runway 15, we'll just go ahead and coast down to Alpha 5. We'll expect to get off at Alpha 5 and then get Charlie and then Charlie 3 to the ramp for signature FBO, where we'll stop, shut down the motor, and get out of the aircraft. Any questions about the recovery to Mobile?
Nope.
Any questions at all about admin?
No.
All right, for contingencies and emergencies, alternate lead does not apply for today, and then aircraft fallout, if our jet happens to go down, we'll see if they have a spare. If there is no spare, obviously we're canceled for the day. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and jump into the alternate aircraft. All right, so big picture today, if we do happen to have any emergencies, we'll handle any emergencies in accordance with NATOPS, the PCL, SOP, and then any guidance that we receive from either base or ATC at that point. We'll use good CRM at all points today. I expect that we will both execute the appropriate boldface should it be necessary, and then once we have done the initial steps to that, the pilot will continue to do any boldface that can only be accomplished in the front cockpit, while the backseat will pull out the PCL and start to back us up with the PCL for the boldface items, as well as starting to read the list for the follow-on items should those be necessary. We will look to handle anything that we encounter internally first, and then once we have that under control, then we'll go ahead and start contacting ATC and base as necessary. If we're going to call base, we need to give them what we have going on, as well as what our situation is with regards to fuel and our distance from the field, and a game plan so that they can kind of check our game plan to make sure that we're doing the right thing there. For ground emergencies today, the big thing is going to be to stop the jet first. So we'll stop the jet. We'll execute any boldface if that's required. If it's required for us to get out of the jet, again, we'll make sure that the jet is stopped. If we have time to give a call out to either ground, tower, or base, we'll let them know. If we don't, we'll just go ahead and get out of the jet via the proper procedures there, and then we'll get the jet towed later on. For aborted takeoffs today, we have low speed and high speed abort criteria. Low speed abort criteria, we'll abort for anything that we don't want to take flying. For high speed abort criteria, we have SOP criteria that we must abort for. That will be the GTS firelight, the firelight, EGT RPM, oil press, as well as a hide fail for the warning lights. And then for our caution lights, we have the ECA2, the canopy caution light, as well as the TP hot caution light that we must abort for. If at any point today we come into, or we have runway departure or loss of directional control, first we will use rudder as required to counter swerve to try to keep us on the runway and go around if able. If we're unable, and it looks like we're going to be departing the runway with greater than 30 knots, then we're just going to go ahead and make the decision to pull the handle and eject. If we're going to eject, or if we're going to stay in the aircraft, I will try to get the throttle off prior to departing the runway. And then once the jet comes to a complete stop, we'll safe our seats, and then if we can open the canopy, we'll do that and get out of the jet. If we can't, then we will wait for the crash crew to come and get us out of the jet. For system failures, as we talked about before, no fast hands in the cockpit, so we're not going to just instantly react, and then we will handle anything that comes up in accordance with, as we talked about, the NATOPS and PCL procedures. For bird strike, if it happens inside the terminal area, expect that we will just immediately jump back into the pattern for a precautionary approach and try to get back on deck as soon as possible. If we are en route, we'll try to take a look and see if we know where the bird hit the aircraft. If we know for sure that it did not go down the intake, then we'll take a look at it, we'll assess and see if we need to do controllability checks. If we assess that we do, we'll get at least to 10,000 feet, if not 15,000 feet, do our controllability checks, slow down to no more than 1/2 lateral stick of input there, and then speed up and stay at least above 10 knots above that, and then we'll come back for a straight end to the nearest practical field. If we think that there's a possibility that the bird went down the intake, now we will put the needle on the nose to the nearest suitable divert and execute a precautionary approach into that field. For midair today, we are not flying section. So it's a good possibility that we have high rates of closure during that midair. First thing is ask yourself the two questions: can I fly the jet, or can the jet fly? If the answer to either is no, we will immediately eject. If we can control the aircraft, then again we'll go ahead and do those controllability checks, and then bring the jet back and land as soon as possible out of that. If we have any sort of radio or ICS failure today, the first thing to do is to check all of our our comm cords, make sure that something hasn't come undone. Once we've done that, if we're still unable to talk to ATC, we'll go back to the last frequency that we knew that worked. Try a couple different frequencies. Try front radio, back radio, pri radio and aux radio with front and back control. Make sure that we're still not able to talk to anybody. If at that point we recognize that we're Nordo, we'll go ahead and squawk 7600. We expect it to be VMC today, and with our flight plan today, most of it's going to put us in a position to go ahead and come back home for course rules. So as we come back home, we will come in for standard course rules. We'll come in to the overhead, rocking our wings, and then we'll look for an Aldis lamp signal as we come out of the break. If we do not see an Aldis lamp signal on our first pass, we'll offset to the inside of the runway. We'll take a look at the runway, make sure that there's nothing on the runway, that it is cleared, and then we'll come back around for a second pass. If we do not see at least a red light at this point, we'll assume that the runway is still clear, having kept eyes on it, and then we'll go ahead and full stop after that one. For inadvertent IMC today, if that becomes a problem today, especially in the low altitude environment, the big thing is to level our wings and get away from the deck. So where could that be a factor? Hey, we're coming into the break, we hit one of those scattered clouds and all of a sudden we can't see the ground anymore. Hey, level the wings, get away from the ground, and then let tower or approach know that we can't maintain VMC and we need to pick up an approach to get back down on deck. For loss of nav aids and lost plane procedures, if for some reason we lose all of our nav aids in the aircraft, again, we should be VMC today, so we can cancel and come back home VFR. If we are IMC at the time when we lose our nav aids, now we'll just confess with ATC, get vectors to come back home. Same thing with lost plane. If we have no idea where we are, we'll come back home for that. For disorientation or vertigo, the big one is to recognize that you're disoriented and confess, and then the good crew member needs to talk the disoriented crew member back onto the instruments. Let them know that, hey, we have we're in a 30-degree left angle of bank. If it's me that's disoriented, if you can fly me out of it like an unusual attitude, hey, right wing down, all right, now level your wings. That will help cage my brain there with a straight and level aircraft. Once we've done that, if we can't recover and get ourselves back into a good mental state, then we're just going to go ahead and bring it back home immediately for the straight in. For hypoxia today, if at any point we feel that we're getting hypoxic, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk to the other aircrew member, let them know, hey, I'm not feeling so good, I think I'm hypoxic. Pass whatever symptom that you think that you're feeling at that point, and if you think that you're feeling hypoxic, immediately go ahead and pull the green ring. I will do the same thing. So it'll be emergency oxygen green ring pull, O-box flow selector knob off, and then initiate rapid descent to 10,000 feet MSL or minimum safe altitude. At that point, we're going to be on the oxygen, the emergency oxygen, and then we're going to be putting the needle on the nose to come straight back to the nearest suitable divert. We'll declare that emergency. And just know that if we're more than a few minutes away from the field, there is a good possibility that we run out of oxygen before we get to the field. So one of the steps in the hypoxia checklist is to turn the airflow knob off. And it says it takes 1 to 2 minutes to cycle that air. So if we know that we're not going to land soon, we might go ahead and turn off that airflow knob sooner rather than later, so that we have good air if we do need to drop our mask prior to getting back to the airfield. For ejection, as always, good body position on the way up. I rock on the way down. Once we get onto either the ground or the water, pull out your PRC 90. We should be able to meet up on 2828. If we are on ground, you might also have the option of using your cell phone. We can give each other a call, give base a call, let them know what happened, and then call 911 to see if they can get out there. If we're out over the water, big thing, get into your raft first, and then we'll try to meet up with each other, paddle to each other, and then again start using our radios to get somebody to come pick us up. Criteria for ejecting: if we are passing through 10,000 feet and we're out of control, there'll be an immediate ejection. Also, if we have some sort of engine malfunction where the motor's not producing power and we're below 1,500 feet and 180 knots, we will eject. And then finally, if we're on the ground, usually we're going to do emergency egress, but say all of a sudden the cockpit becomes engulfed in flames and we've done our takeoff checklist already, we could go ahead and pull the handle, or if maybe we see that an aircraft is about to taxi into us at a high rate of speed, or maybe hit us on the runway or something like that, that might be time to pull a handle as well. Also with the parting the runway, as we talked about earlier. For SAR Unseen Commander, if we happen to do that today, we'll pull out the checklist from our in-flight guide and we'll go through that. But the big thing that we want to do is first find our nearest suitable divert airfield that we can go land at, and then find a bingo fuel in order to get to that airfield with at least 500 pounds of gas. We don't want to run ourselves below 500 pounds and then turn ourselves into an emergency as well. And then finally, for diverts today, we have a couple of them on the board. So obviously we have Pensacola International, and then also just west of NPA we have Jack Edwards. There's also Sunny Callahan out there that's just east of the bay, and then on the west side of the bay we have Mobile Downtown, as well as Pascagoula that's to the southwest of Mobile Regional. So plenty of places to go if we need a divert field. Any questions on our emergencies? All right, for ORM today, we'll pull out the ORM workbook or checklist. So we've already covered I'm safe. Do you have any illnesses, medications that you're taking, excess stress, alcohol that you've done within the last 12 hours, fatigue, or eating or drinking habits that are not healthy that will affect today's flight? I do not either, so we'll be low for that. For human factors, big one is that the student is going to be out of the aircraft for greater than 1 week, since this is your first flight in the aircraft. So that's going to put us at least at a medium there. Instructor has not been out of the aircraft for more than 2 weeks. Crew day were both less than 10 hours. Showtime was not earlier than 6:30. Student's prior performance was good. Instructor or student warm-up, neither one of us fit that criteria. We also have no personal factors or late departures from the squadron spaces or early arrivals. So human factors, the only thing that's going to be anything above low will again be the first flight for the student. And then for mission profile, this is not at night, it's not a cross country, it's not section or division maneuvering, it's not a BFM flight, not an air to ground mission. And then there is a little bit of air nav, but it's just to get from here to Mobile Regional. So we will call mission profile a low. And then for weather today, again, there's a couple of scattered and broken layers out there, but we're VMC at all of our airfields. A couple of vicinity showers, but nothing that's calling any sort of big thunderstorm or anything like that. So for tonight, we will be low, or for this afternoon, we will be low for weather. So all in all, because we had that medium in human factors, we will call ourselves a medium for today. So some ways to mitigate that. Since it's coming mostly from the student and him not being in the aircraft ever before, just expect that the IP is probably going to be a little bit more hands-on as we're in the aircraft. So we're going to take our time. If you're not ready to taxi, just let me know you're not ready to taxi. We're not going to taxi until you're completely ready to go. Let me know when you're ready to go, and then we'll be off there. We're going to follow every checklist perfectly. There's no rush on any checklist. Do not do anything from memory. Just make sure that we're completing all of our steps there. And then if at any point today it seems like the student is confused or doesn't understand what is going on around him, has low SA, expect that the IP will probably come in and talk on the radios for a second to get things cleared up, and then give the radios back to the student just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So big picture, we'll be mitigating just by the IP being a little bit more hands-on than maybe we would otherwise. Any questions about ORM? All right, for safety, safing and arming our seats. Today we will do those in accordance with our takeoff and post-landing checklist. Just make sure that we will be arming our seats no earlier than closing the canopy and pulling out of the line and from underneath the canopies there, no later than calling for takeoff. And then for safing our seats, we will safe them no earlier than departing the active runway, and then again no later than opening the canopy and pulling back into the line with the canopies over top of us. For FOD prevention, make sure that we have all of our zippers zipped up, that we don't take anything out to the jet that we don't need, that we take the little black plastic clips off of our knee boards. Just go ahead and throw those away now. And then also, before we get out of the jet, just do a good sweep. Make sure that you have all your stuff out of the jet, and take a quick glance underneath the seat. Make sure that nothing fell down there. For canopy movement, it'll be two-way comms there all day long, so I'll call canopy and just reply with a clear and make sure that you are actually clear of the canopy. Expect that the IP will control the canopy at all times today unless for some reason I am incapable of doing so. If at any point today somebody G-locks, we'll be done with our mission. We'll bring it back home for the straight-in full stop. We'll be done for the day. Training timeout and DOR policies are in effect. Just let me know if you need a training timeout, and if it's getting to the point that you can't recover, then we'll just go ahead and knock it off and bring it back home. And then finally, we will also knock it off for any sort of emergency that happens while we're maneuvering, or any sort of safety of flight that happens to come up during the flight. Any questions about safety? All right, for questions of the day, the boldface for today is compressor stall. So that will be simultaneously perform steps 1 and 2, throttle minimum for safe flight, controls neutralize, and then monitor EGT RPM. If EGT is greater than 450 degrees Celsius for more than 6 seconds after throttle idle, execute air start. All right, so after that, we'll jump into the PCL. And then the PCL will tell us that if EGT and RPM indications are normal, throttle minimum for safe flight. So that's where we're going to find that 78 to 87% throttle usage there for our precautionary approach. And then we're going to land as soon as practical. And that land as soon as practical, obviously we don't want to waste any extra time. So somewhere between practical and possible there, just so that we don't accidentally do more damage to our jet. So some sort of scenario. Say today when we're executing our approach turn stall, as we get the stall there, we come down, we look to recover, we go MRT boards in, set 24 units. Maybe we bring the throttle up too fast, or we go above 24 units on our pull, and then we hear a bang bang that sounds like it's coming from behind us. Sounds like somebody's hitting the back of the airplane with a baseball bat. That's likely a compressor stall. So immediately, as we talked about, throttle minimum for safe flight, controls neutralize, and then we're going to monitor our EGT and our RPM. For today, we'll assume that the EGT goes back below 450 degrees Celsius. So at that point, we're okay, but we need to start heading back home. So we'll knock it off. Once we get pointed back towards the field, we'll come up with ATC and let them know that we're declaring emergency and we'd like a precautionary approach back to Navy Sherman. And then we'll look to do either an overhead precautionary approach or a straight in, depending upon where we are in relation to the airfield. We'll bring it back to a full stop, get on deck, and then we'll talk with base and see what they want us to do with the jet. Any questions on the boldface scenario? All right. For T-45 NATOPS, where and why is the AV bit displayed, and how is it removed? So the AV bit will come up on the bottom of our MFDs on both sides, or on both MFDs, and it will come up if at any point on our bit page something goes to degrade. So in order to check that, when we see AV bit, we'll just go menu bit, and it'll bring up the bit page. That will make the AV bit advisory go away, and then we can just take a look at the bit page and see what is degraded. Just know that anytime we take the IFF into standby mode, it's going to give us that AV bit, and we're going to see that degrade on the bit page. So that should be normal prior to us calling for takeoff and going IFF to on. For SOP of the day, overwater training flights are prohibited when the wind chill temp is or below 32 degrees, or when the temperature of the water is below 60 degrees. And finally, general knowledge of the day. Discuss the level of ATC compliance when operating in Class Charlie airspace. We must have an operable transponder with a Mode C, as well as two-way communications before we can enter the airspace. Any questions on question of the day? All right, for training rules today, no training rules are required. For attack admin, so we'll have a couple of attack admin points here, basically getting in and out of the area. So big thing is getting into the Pensacola MOA will request us 2 adjacent blocks, and then once they clear us, they should give us a heading, but we must stay on our altitude until we're actually into those blocks. Once we get into those blocks, then we're cleared to climb. We must stay inside those blocks, and then we'll switch to button 18 on our PRI radio. Our limitations today for the MOA will be 10,000 feet to 23,000 feet unless the altimeter is below 2992, at which point we're restricted to only 22,000 feet. Before doing any maneuvers, we'll do a pre-stall checklist, so we'll just break out the checklist real quick. It's in our in-flight guide. We'll make sure that we have that complete, and then we'll do a G-warm. For the G-warm, we'll accelerate to 350 knots, and then we'll do a 90-degree turn to either the left or the right. We'll clear our way first, and then we'll execute a 4G pull for 90 degrees. Once we're done with that, we'll level our wings, continue in a descent, accelerate to about 400 knots or so, and then we'll do another 90-degree turn, first pulling to 6 Gs and then relaxing back down to 4 Gs. Once we complete that 90-degree turn, we will be G-warm complete. And then finally, before departing the area, a couple things. First, we'll make sure that we get ATIS prior to contacting ATC, since that's going to be a pretty quick trip there. And then we'll contact ATC on button 5 when we're leaving the MOA. And then after we leave the MOA, or as we're leaving the MOA, we'll execute our descent penetration checks to make sure that we're ready to go for the landing environment. Any questions on TAC admin? All right, for conduct, so en route conduct, we'll plan on climbing up initially to 3,000 feet for our departure, and then we'll expect that they'll give us at some point up to 11,000 feet. When we're climbing through 5,000 feet AGL, we'll reset the law to 5,000 feet, and we'll acknowledge that over the ICS. And then once we get up to 10,000 feet, we'll execute our 10K checks, again, going through the checklist to make sure that everything is looking good with our engine instruments and our cabin pressurization. As we're coming out of the area, expect a max range descent unless it's required to get down to altitude for course rules if maybe we're backed up and it's a steep descent. Otherwise, we'll fly around at max range all day today. Request course rules with approach. So when we check in on button 5, we'll just let approach know that we are complete in the MOA, and we'd like to request course rules for the overhead. And we'll also give them the identifier as well for ATIS. And then after approach switches is over to tower, we will check in with them and also request the carrier break for today. So we expect that call to sound like tower rocket 11 as X-ray information or request carrier. At that point, they'll let us know whether or not we'll be cleared for the carrier. If we are, we'll bring it down to 800 feet and execute the carrier break there to the left. We'll execute a couple turns in the pattern. We'll talk about that a little bit more during conduct. But once we're done with our pattern work, then we're going to look to pick up our clearance back to Mobile Regional. And again, we'll just work that out with Tower while we're in the pattern, and then we'll expect to get a climb out instruction from them. And then once we're done in Tower's airspace, they'll pass us off to Pensacola departure, and then over to Mobile approach. We'll make sure that as we're leaving Pensacola airspace that we are getting ATIS from Mobile prior to switching over to Mobile approach, so we don't have to check in with negative ATIS with those guys. And then once we check in with them, we'll check in with the information, our altitude, and then request the ILS to the active runway, which we expect to be 15 for the full stop. Any questions on the en route conduct? All right, so for the high work in the area, as we talked about, the first thing we're going to do when we get up there is going to do the G-warm. We've already talked about the procedures for that. Following that, we're going to start the next maneuvers at 16,000 feet to ensure that we don't go out of the bottom of the airspace. So the first one is going to be the vertical recovery. So we'll start at 280 knots. And then we'll execute a 4G pull to 60 degrees nose high. Once we bleed off our airspeed to below 180 knots, we'll go MRT boards in, level our nose, and then return to level flight there. Once we're at level flight, that maneuver will be complete. The idea of that is just to show how quickly we can get away from the ground if we find ourselves in a bad situation. After that, we'll be doing the accelerated stall. So it'll be 280 knots, and then we'll pick and clear our direction either right or left. We'll roll into about an 80-degree angle of bank, and then we'll the IP will start a pull on the back stick pressure. And then after about 17 units, we'll start to feel a little bit of a rumble in the jet. As we keep going back to 18 and 19 units, we'll feel the jet start to waffle and the wing drop off. At that point, that's the stall. So MRT boards in, level your wings, but you'll feel that as soon as we let off the backstick pressure, we'll be flying again. The next maneuver will be the brake turn stall. This time we'll start at 300 knots, but it'll look very similar to the accelerated stall, except for this time, as we roll into that turn and start to pull back, we'll go idle and speed brakes out. And again, we'll pull through 17 units. We'll feel the wings start to drop off, and again, it'll be MRT boards in, level your wings, and we'll be flying again. And then after that, we'll do the power off stall. So we'll slow down to 180 knots. We'll get into a 180 knot power off glide. And then once we have that all set, we'll note our VSI there just to note and see how much it's going to change once we get our nose back down towards the ground. And then we'll level off, bring the velocity vector to the horizon, and wait until we get the stall there, so the wing drop off. Once we do that, we'll push the nose back over, look to accelerate back to 180 knots. And again, we'll note our VSI as we're trying to accelerate back to 180 knots. After that, we'll do the landing attitude maneuver. So we should stay below 200 knots. We'll call below 200 and drop the gear. Once our gear is down, and our flaps are full and speed brakes out, we'll execute the landing checklist. And then once everybody's done with the checklist, we will start with the landing attitude maneuver. So again, we'll pick a heading, we'll note our altitude, and then we'll bring the throttle back to idle. Once we feel the rudder shakers, it'll be MRT boards in, and then we'll maintain our attitude with a waterline symbol until we start to fly away. And then as the waterline symbol or velocity vector catches the E bracket there, or 17 units AOA, will intercept that and climb away. Once we see 2 positive rates of climb, we will be done with that maneuver. The next maneuver will be the landing attitude stall. So it'll be exactly like that landing attitude maneuver, except for this time we're going to take it all the way down to the stall. So in order to recognize the stall, we'll see either 30 units AOA, or we'll see wing tip drop off one direction or the other. Once we do that, the call will be MRT boards in, set 24 units. So expect that the IP will go MRT, or slowly go MRT with the boards in. We'll initially break the stall, get below 24 units, and then a slow reset to 24 units as we're bringing the throttle up to MRT to try to keep from getting that compressor stall. And then finally, the last stall will be the approach turn stall, which will look exactly like the landing attitude stall, with the exception of now we'll have a 25-degree angle bank either left or right as we get into the stall. So the big one is going to be MRT boards in, level your wings, reset 24 units, and then we'll climb away from that one. And same thing, as soon as we see 2 positive rates of climb, we'll be done with those maneuvers. Then we'll clean up and jump into unusual attitudes. So we have IMC and VMC unusual attitudes. The big difference between the two is anytime we see our nose high, if we're VMC, we can go ahead and roll on our back and pull our nose down to the horizon and then roll back to wings level in order to get ourselves back to the horizon. If we are IMC, we cannot roll onto our back. We just need to push over and get ourselves back down to the horizon. So that's the big difference between IMC and VMC unusual attitudes. But for today, we'll do at least one IMC and one VMC, and then once for today, I'll have the student close their eyes. And then I'll get us into some unusual attitude, and then once I say recover, go ahead and open your eyes and just talk me back through getting our nose back to the horizon and being straight and level. So suppose we were nose high and we're doing the VMC with our wings upright. I expect you to call MRT boards in, roll right to bring our nose back down to the horizon, and as we're approaching the horizon, all right, roll wings level, and then pull the nose to the horizon, not to exceed limits. And then once we're back to straight and level flight, we'll be complete with that. And then if we happen to be in any sort of nose-low attitude, it's going to be the same for VMC or IMC. It'll purely be idle, speed brakes if required, roll wings level, and then pull the nose to the horizon. Again, not to exceed limits there. And then we'll be complete. Once we're done with unusual attitudes, we'll get into the aerobatics work at that point. And then, so we'll start with the aileron roll. We'll set 300 knots, 89%, and then for the actual roll, we'll go 10 degrees nose up, and then we'll roll either left or right, and then we'll probably roll the other direction to prove that it does work both ways. After that, we'll do the wing over, which again, we'll start at 300 knots, 89%. We'll pull our nose up 20 degrees, and then we'll start either a left or right hand turn. We'll essentially draw a big U in the sky and get our nose pointed the other direction, rolling over our left or right wingtip, depending on which direction we go there. For the barrel roll, now we'll be 350 knots, 92%. Again, bring our nose up 20 degrees, and then we'll start our both roll and pull to either the left or the right, displacing ourselves either left or right. And then the big part of this is trying to hit that 90 degrees off checkpoint while being 180 degrees inverted, and then coming back around and intercepting our original altitude and heading. After the barrel roll, then we'll get into the squirrel cage stuff. So we'll start off with the loop. So 380 knots, 96%. We'll pull 4 Gs to intercept 17 units. And then as we're going over the top with our nose pointed up, what I need from the student is to be calling out altitudes and airspeeds. If at any point it looks like we're going to get close to the top of the airspace, be emphatic about it, and then I'll increase the pull to try to stop the jet's movement up towards the top of that. And if at any point we start to decelerate below 85 knots, again, be emphatic about it, and then we need to go throttle idle, and then controls neutralize, and then recover the aircraft once we have a nose-low attitude. After that, we'll come back around, and as we'll maintain 17 units, and then intercept again 4 Gs and try to pick up the same heading and altitude that we were on when we started. For the half Cuban, it'll look almost exactly the same as the loop, except for as we cross over the top and start heading back down, and now we'll roll our wings level, 45 degrees nose low, and then try to pick up the same altitude and airspeed, except for we'll be going 180 degrees opposite of where we came from. And for the Immelmann, it'll be the same pull to the top, except for on the top. Now we're going to roll wings level and have straight and level flight while we're at the top of the loop. That's a good time to go ahead and execute the split S. So from there, we'll look to pick up 180 knots, and then we'll pull our nose 10 degrees nose up, and then roll inverted, and then pull back through, intercepting 17 units down to 4 Gs. And again, anytime we have our nose pointed towards the deck, give me air speeds and altitudes. But the big idea is to give me those altitudes so that we know that we're not going to bust the bottom of the airspace. Now, as long as we start at the correct altitudes, we should be fine today. So that is all the high air work. Keep in mind, you've been out of the jet for a while. So if at any point today you start to not feel good, please tell me, all right? We can definitely knock off the maneuvers for a few minutes. We can fly straight and level. If we don't get everything finished today, that's fine. You have several more flights to go and execute the rest of these maneuvers. But if you get uncontrollably airsick, we have to knock it off and come back home, and we'll be incomplete for the day. So please, if you start not feeling well, just let me know. We'll do what we can. If we can't finish it all, we'll come back and get it another day. Any questions about any of the high work? All right, so we talked about how we're going to get back to the airfield. Once we get back to Navy Pensacola, we will execute a few laps around the pattern and show a few different types of landings. So the first one, we're just going to come into the break and do a standard touch and go. We want to talk about calm while we're in the pattern, so it should be standard calm for us today. As we come into the break. So as we execute the break and we're on the downwind, as we hit the beam position, we'll call Sherman Tower, rocket 1-1, a beam with the gear, touch and go. In this case, we're also going to call low key on request as we intend to go do a practice precautionary approach off of this touch and go. All right, they'll come back and they'll give us clearance to land on either the left or the right. We'll expect the left today. And then after we put down our gear and run through our checklist, we'll give them a gear call. So once we're below 200 knots, I expect the student to say below 200, and then the IP will put down the gear and flaps full, speed brakes out. And then once you see 3 down and locked with flaps full and the speed brakes out, call gear, and that'll lead the IP to do the landing checklist. Once we concur with the landing checklist, again, make that call to tower for the gear call to make sure we get that one on tape. We'll come around, we'll touch down. As soon as we do a touch and go, we'll immediately start to clean up. Expect the tower will give us clearance to turn either left or right up to low key. So they'll tell us, hey, left turn up to left low key. Once we have enough airspeed on the jet, we'll pull our nose up and start heading up towards low key. So we're looking for 3,000 feet, about 1.5 miles of beam. Once we're approaching that, we'll bring the throttle back. We'll set about 80% and try to keep it there. And then we'll try to keep our airspeed just below 200 knots using our speed brakes. When we're at the beam, we'll put our gear down and go flaps half. And then we'll make our, low key. We'll make our low key call. So tower, rocket 1-1, low key with the gear, touch and go. Again, they'll give us clearance to land, and everything will be the same in regards to our landing checklist, with the exception of now we will have to configure a little bit later than we did on our first pass there. So as we're coming around, we're looking to stay at 175 knots and then look to be at about 1,500 feet at the 90 as we're coming around for our precautionary approach. Once we know that we have the field made, we will go to full flaps, make sure that our speed brakes are out, and then we'll check to make sure that we are landing checks complete. We'll call landing checks complete over the ICS, and then we'll go ahead and bring the precautionary approach down to the runway. And then as soon as we touch the runway again, we'll execute MRT boards in and get back into the pattern. After that, we'll come back around. We'll look to do a roll and go. So same procedures in the pattern as from our first pass, so the same, a beam call there. And then, except for we will now request the option. So tower, rocket 1-1, a beam, gear, request the option. At that point, they should come back with you're cleared for the option again, 7 left. And as we come around for our roll and go, we'll touch down, we'll leave the throttle at idle, and then we'll remain so until we see either 100 knots or the forward board, whichever happens first. MRT boards in, the engine will spool up for a second, and once it gets spooled up, we'll be able to fly away at that point. All right, coming off that touch and go, or off that roll and go, now we'll set up for the no flap touch and go. So first we'll go flaps half, get some airspeed back, and then we'll go flaps full. Flaps up. Expect that the on speed will be about 175 knots with our flaps up today. So big things to pay attention to are overspeeding the gear, both airborne, so greater than 200 knots, and then overspeeding the wheels when we touch down at 176 knots. So while we're in the pattern, again, we're just going to call our standard a beam, gear, touch and go. Just know that our pattern's going to be a little bit wider, we're going to be a little bit deeper as we are coming around, but we don't really need to talk to tower about that. Again, as we're in the turn and we are coming around with that on speed of being 175 knots in the turn, that's going to increase. So if we have to wrap it up a little bit, expect to see airspeeds increasing 185 to 190 knots. If we start to get to that point, back me up, let me know that we're starting to approach those airspeeds, and we'll level out our wings a little bit as we don't want to overspeed the gear. And then finally, once we're in the groove, as we're coming down, again, we don't want to see any more than 176 knots ground speed before we touch down. So we'll monitor the ground speed. We should be fine, assuming that there's no tailwind. And then we'll just, as we come into flare, if we don't see 176 knots or less, then we'll just execute the wave off and go around. If we do see less than 176 knots, we'll touch down and then again execute the touch and go and get airborne. Coming off that touch and go or wave off, again, we're going to be really close to gear speed, so just back me up there as we're climbing out. Make sure that we don't go booming through 190 to 195 knots and try to overspeed the gear at 200 knots. All right, at this point, we're going to go back to flaps full. We'll put our speed brakes back out, and then we will start talking with tower and let them know that it's going to be our last pass in the pattern, and we want to pick up our clearance out to Mobile Regional. There's no standard comm for this, so it's just going to be a back and forth with tower. So I recommend something like, hey tower, rocket 1-1, this will be our last touch and go. Following this touch and go, we'd like to pick up our clearance to Mobile Regional. There will be some back and forth there. Expect to get climb out instructions from tower. And then once we come back around, when we hit the beam, your standard call there, a beam, gear, touch and go. Maybe remind them that we're departing the pattern after that. And then once we're done with that touch and go, we'll comply with their climb out instructions, and then they'll kick us off to departure. Same departure call as you would make otherwise when taking off. And that will be it with the pattern work in the back at Navy Sherman. Any questions about our pattern work? All right, so the last thing that we'll talk about real quick as we're heading back over to Mobile Regional, we've already talked about the routing. We did the ILS brief at the beginning of our brief here, but some things just to keep in mind when we're setting up for this approach. So as we're navigating over there, obviously we'll have waypoint box, we'll be steering towards TZ, then Trader, and then finally Mobile. Once they start to give us vectors, getting into Mobile, expect that we'll probably be vectored a little bit to the east of the airfield to make that turn around for the dogleg. As soon as they give us those vectors, you can start setting yourself up for the ILS approach. So you can draw your course line 145 through the waypoint, leave that box, and go plan mode with that. And then as we're getting into the terminal area, keep backing down your HSI so that we have the smallest possible scale while still being able to see the airfield. Also, make sure that you have 109.9 dialed in there to the VOR frequency, and then real quick, just go CDI, ILS, and then back to plan form. And what that's going to do is that's going to pop up the ILS needles on the ADI and the HUD. After you do that, you'll probably get an ILS caution. This is the one time that you can hit reject, so just go ahead and hit reject. That way it's not flashing a big caution on the ADI. But then after that, note that the needles will still probably be flashing since we'll be outside of their acceptable cone limits. And then we can just leave our jet set up that way. As we're coming around and we intercept that base leg and then that dog leg to final, just keep an eye on the localizer needle on the ILS. Once that starts to come alive, we'll just reach down and press CDI and bring that up on our HSI, and that's the last part of the HSI that we'll have to manipulate before we touch down. Once we check in, get switched over to tower, we'll make the call with tower. So Mobile Tower Rocket 11 is 10 miles north for the ILS full stop. They'll likely give us our clearance to land at that point. Go ahead and roger up the clearance to land. If we haven't already, we'll make sure that we call slow for gear, and then once we're below 200 knots, call below 200. At that point, the IP will again put down his gear, full flaps, but leave the speed brakes in. We'll leave the speed brakes in until we get to the final approach fix, at which point now we'll begin our descent. So speed brakes out, and then we will reset our law now to 2,000 feet, as that's our decision altitude there. And as we're coming down, just make sure we're backing the pilot up. If we get to our decision altitude or our decision height, that we'll go ahead and call the missed approach, assuming that we don't see the runway in sight. We expect to see the runway in sight today, so we'll go ahead and touch down, bring it to a full stop, as we talked about, getting off at Alpha 5, Charlie, Charlie 3, back to signature. And we'll shut down the jet there and jump out of the jet and go get some Chick-fil-A and talk about our next flight. Any questions on the RTB portion of that?